If you are an American citizen and you have a child, your child would have American citizenship. Okay, we're not talking about that. We're talking about non-citizens who come into our country with the express purpose of having children here, and then their children automatically become citizens. And the odds of you being deported once you have an American citizen baby are very, very low. And even if you were deported, your child can come back. They've got American citizenship. I don't begrudge the attempt to add American citizenship to your child. If you're from a Latin American country, if you're even Chinese and you want the advantage of an American dual citizenship with China. But if, Buck, you and I were in China doing Clay and Buck, and one of us had a child in China, we wouldn't get to have a Chinese citizen child. They don't do that there. They don't do it in Japan. They don't do it in Korea. The border is a total mess. Bill Malugin this morning shared video of 1,000 immigrants walking essentially across the border in El Paso, Texas. You'll recall that when 50 illegal immigrants arrived in Martha's Vineyard, the entire island fell apart. You can well imagine what the constant influx of illegal immigration is doing in cities like El Paso, where there is a perpetual flow of people right across the border. Bit of news. This just came down from Bill Malugin on Twitter a few minutes ago. California Governor Gavin Newsom left his state, currently visiting the U.S.-Mexico border to, quote, discuss immigration reform and his commitment to supporting immigrant communities and the border region. Buck, this feels a bit, at least to me, like a shot across the bow at the Biden administration, because they have consistently said that Joe Biden is too busy to be able to go visit the border.
There's also just the numbers that are piling up right now. You see Bill Malugin, again, from Fox, down at the border.
Only person, by the way, covering the border, it feels
it's
like,
amazing,
in the whole
isn't
country.
it? To have that beat to yourself, because it doesn't help Democrats politically, so all the other journos have no interest in it. They had 16,000 officially cross the border. That means people that surrendered, people that said, hey, here I am. That's not including gotaways, which is probably another 3 or 4,000 on top of that. But let's just say it's that 16,000 number. You're at an 8,000 a day run rate right now for the month of December. It's 250,000 people in a month, everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, no other country in the world had. If this were happening anywhere else in the world, it would be the result of an active civil war next door or something, and you'd see all of this reporting about, oh my gosh, and they'd put them in refugee camps. They wouldn't say, oh, you're just welcome into our country. That's actually not how it goes. I was in the Syrian refugee camps in Jordan back in 2015 in Zatari, 120,000 people living in tents in the desert, because the Jordanians were like, look, we'll give you safe harbor, but we're not making you Jordanians like you're Syrians. And we have this situation unprecedented. Nowhere else in the world is this going on in this way. Democrats just don't care. Gavin Newsom going down there, you know what this is? It's yes, one, it's about you and I both know if Newsom gets a lane and, he thinks he's on deck if Biden can't do this, if Biden's not going to be the guy. And I think Newsom would even run against Kamala if Biden had to step down before the end of his term for legitimate health reasons, which is always possible. But also, Clay, they're just going to push now for amnesty. This is what this always turns into. The first term, they don't talk about the border in a Democrat administration. That's what they did under Obama. Very little talk about the border. In fact, Obama was called the deporter-in-chief for a little while back in about 2010, 2011, because he had effectively maintained and even escalated a little bit of the interior enforcement, but it was all to try to ram through a massive amnesty in the second term, which then fell apart, the Gang of Eight bill, we all recall that. That's the same plan here. They want a massive 20 million person amnesty, at least 20. I mean, people always yell at me, no one knows the real number. It's at least 20 million.
We should be having a real conversation about birthright citizenship, regardless of what your politics are. It's like a third rail no one will touch. The idea that if you illegally enter the country and have a baby as a non-citizen of the United States, your baby automatically becomes a citizen of the United States. It's being exploited everywhere. Even
no other country does this, by the way. Again, other countries don't do this.
It basically doesn't exist. And I actually went and did the research.
Okay, there are a handful of countries, but generally speaking, that's not how it goes.
Do you know, I mean, historically, because, again, I think the history of this matters, this was a colonizing ploy. And let me explain what I mean by that. There was fear that if, let's say, you were in England or you were in France or you were in Italy or Spain and you went to a colony in the New World, that if your kids were born there, they wouldn't be citizens of Spain or England or France or any of these colonizing countries. And so birthright citizenship extended to those countries at the time. That's why it existed, and it's continued to exist. And the idea, Buck, that we have Chinese people who are super wealthy that are coming over here, coming and having their babies in this country so that their citizens can be dual Chinese and American citizens.
Then they go back to China.
Yes.
They live in China. They're Chinese nationals their entire lives. But then when they want to get a job or go to university in the U.S., they're treated like everybody who grew up in California, born and raised there. Same thing. And it's just clearly gaming the system. Clay, the number of people who show up when I've spoken to Border Patrol about this, when I've been down there, you got all these women who are 8-9 months pregnant showing up. First of all, think about, going through that journey, putting yourself in the hands of the cartels, huge risk. But they're doing that so that as soon as they get into the country, they're going to have taxpayer-funded birth in a hospital, and that then will have a U.S. citizen child. They will have a U.S. citizen child, and then then with the chain migration and everything else, you're never going to get rid of somebody who has a U.S. citizen child. So this is the game that is being played. Everyone knows it too. Clay, they're also not asylum seekers. They're lying. They're not asylum seekers. Very, very, very few of them even get asylum if they go through the whole process, and most of them drop out of the process. They are abusing the system, and they're doing this, dare I say, systematically, and they're doing it to the tune of millions of people, and the Democrats want this. They don't want this to stop. That's what everyone has to understand. There's no incentive for the Biden administration to shut this down.
And again, I don't begrudge people who are trying to game our system. I don't. I mean, if you were able to come here and get your kid American citizenship and you were struggling economically, it makes total sense. But we have to remove the incentive. Like, the idea that we're not debating this on a national level in an intelligent fashion and understanding that this birthright citizenship idea, by and large, is a vestige of colonialism. That's where it came from and doesn't exist almost anywhere else in the world, certainly in many modern democracies. I mean, if
it's not in Europe, Japan, I can tell you that. You show up in France, you're like, oh, I'm on vacation, I just had a baby here. You're not a citizen. Well, it's not in the EU.
If you're an American or serving overseas in Japan or in Korea, and you have a child in Japan or Korea, your kid is not Japanese or Korean. It just doesn't happen, right? So, and the fact that it doesn't exist hardly anywhere else in the world is a conversation that should be had. Because, Buck, the incentive structure at our border is completely broken. We are incentivizing, by we, I mean Democrats, are incentivizing as many people as possible to break our law, come across our southern border. I'll just give you this as a further example. Buck, if you have let's say you have a grandparent who is from Europe, right? Your family, partly European, whatever it might be. Those people, if they haven't gotten the COVID shot, are not allowed to come into the United States still. That is the current law. Anybody who walks across the southern border, doesn't matter what you've done with COVID at all, which is why I made the ridiculous joke back when Novak Djokovic was not able to actually play in the U.S. Open. What would they do if he slung a tennis racket on his shoulder and just walked directly across our southern border? Now, it's absurd and it's ridiculous, but he could easily just get on a bus and ride up to New York City and be here legally.
I mean, there's also a whole category. People that really study illegal immigration and know what they're talking about will tell you there are whole subsets of law that are just not applied to illegal immigrants. Document fraud, for example, forgery, not filing income tax. Doesn't matter. You have to file as an adult American. You have to file income tax, right? Some people actually get money from the government, but the point is not filing is even an offense. And they just don't enforce these laws against these individuals because they're not supposed to be here in the first place. So they're in this whole different category. And the Democrats, I think, just see this, Clay, as increase the flood to the point where there can be no choice other than a mass amnesty. And that's why you see all these people coming to the border right now. As Title 42 ends, it is going to be right now easier than ever to get into the United States illegally, and more likely to be enormously advantageous than ever as they're going to start pushing for an amnesty again. The Biden administration is already not enforcing the U.S.-Mexico border and illegal immigration. So what do we think happens? It just gets worse.
Well, an amnesty is not going to make it better, because then people know that there will eventually be an amnesty given, right? So you just have to wait around 20 years.
We had an amnesty in 1986, and Ronald Reagan admitted later on that it was not what was promised. What they do is they say there'll be enforcement mechanisms, and people who don't meet the following criteria will leave. Therefore, let's let in everybody that says they're there. And that's not how it actually goes. You just let everybody in, you legalize them, and then you don't actually have anybody really who is kicked out, because it's not a pathway to citizenship. It's a conveyor belt. You just have to be there.
How many times have you even heard birthright citizenship discussed as a political issue in the last 20 years?
I think it has come up occasionally. Stephen Miller, for example, the Trump administration brought it up. There have been some people on the right who have talked about this.
I mean, really debated like in Congress, or like, I mean, like as a legitimate question.
No, it should be brought up, and it should. I think right now the only real, there's like a couple of footnotes in judicial. There's a footnote in a judicial opinion that people rely on for the birthright citizenship ruling, but there's really nothing even solid in. There's nothing recent and solid in Supreme Court decisions that would indicate one way or the other whether. I mean, because I need someone to explain to me. So someone comes here from Beijing for the express purpose of having a child on U.S. soil during the 30 days they're here on, as a tourist or whatever. That child then goes back to Beijing, should have U.S. citizenship. That makes sense to anybody? Someone needs to explain. By the way, that's a crime. What they're doing is a crime, but the citizenship stands. Why?
No, it's crazy. And look, I think Democrats are smarter about this stuff. How often does reparations end up in discussion? All the time. Reparations is crazy. Having the debate is important because it makes people aware to even think about it. I bet there's a huge percentage of our audience out there that never has really thought that much about birthright citizenship because it hasn't been debated that much in the grander context. And let me also make this clear. If you are an American citizen and you have a child, your child would have American citizenship. Okay, we're not talking about that. We're talking about non-citizens who come into our country with the express purpose of having children here, and then their children automatically become citizens. And the odds of you being deported once you have an American citizen baby are very, very low. And even if you were deported, your child can come back. They've got American citizenship. I don't begrudge the attempt to add American citizenship to your child. If you're from a Latin American country, if you're even Chinese and you want the advantage of an American dual citizenship with China. But if, Buck, you and I were in China doing Clay and Buck, and one of us had a child in China, we wouldn't get to have a Chinese citizen child. They don't do that there. They don't do it in Japan. They don't do it in Korea. It's almost impossible for birthright citizenship to exist for non-citizens in most of the world. And again, I looked it all up. This is a legacy of colonialism by and large, where they were trying to encourage citizens of European countries to go to the colonies, and they wanted to make sure their kids, that those kids that were born to citizens from Europe were still considered subjects. Like if back in 1720, if you had a child in Boston, that was still a British subject, even though it was born in the United States in the colony of Massachusetts. That's where this came from.